Morgan wasn't a superstitious person. He never threw salt anywhere other than on his food, and he loved black cats. Morgan didn't believe in luck, good or bad. He just lived his life with the choices he had made based on the opportunities, and that was that. Theo, his best friend, was the complete opposite. Theo was the kid in class that had a rabbit's foot keychain on his backpack and picked up every penny he'd seen. Morgan didn't mind the superstitions, he just ignored them. If anything, Theo was learning that maybe they weren't true, since Morgan always seemed to have the same experiences as Theo, with no luck needed. On April Fool's Day, Theo had the great idea of gifting Morgan a really nice rabbit's foot keychain, mostly as a gag gift, but Theo truly believed in its powers. Morgan thought it was great, and stuffed it in his jacket's chest pocket and unintentionally forgot about it. That same day after school, Morgan and Theo were walking to Theo's house to do homework, aka play video games. The boys stopped at a corner store to grab a few snacks. Just before they went up to pay at the register, a little sports hatchback screeched right in front of the store. Someone wearing a ski mask jumped out and ran into the store. Morgan pulled Theo and hid in a corner by some boxes, out of sight from the assailant. The boys heard screaming and arguing up front in the store, and then they heard a thud, or someone falling to the ground hard. Theo stood up and made eye contact with the aggressor. The person started walking up to the boys with a menacing look in his eyes, then Morgan stood up, holding out a large metal bar, with a sharp hook on its end, that had been silently leaning on the store's corner. The man froze and gave the boys a blood-curdling laugh. Just as the man got closer, Theo took a swing at the man, and the man threw Theo across the floor, making him land by the refrigerator's glass doors. Morgan jabbed the metal bar towards the man, and then he saw the man swing a large knife toward his chest. Morgan felt the impact, and meanwhile, he began looking down towards his chest. The man scoffed and ran out towards his car still parked outside. Morgan fell to the ground, but was confused he wasn't in any pain. He rapidly began to pat his chest and abdomen, realizing he was okay. He then crawled over to Theo, who was also okay, just in shock from the whole incident. Morgan helped Theo up, and they both ran up towards the register, where the owner was on the ground. He was also okay, but since he was elderly, he had just stayed on the ground in fear of getting hurt more by the robber. The store's owner could not express his gratitude towards the boys, although they didn't stop the robber. They had tried. The shop owner told the boys they could stop by any time and get whatever they wanted from now on. After just getting their original snacks and staying with the elderly man until the police arrived, the boys made their way out towards Theo's home. The boys were still riled up by the incident, and Morgan started nervously laughing. Just as he grabbed his chest from laughing, he felt his pocket and then took a closer look. He saw a puncture hole from the robber's knife in his pocket. Then he realized that the lucky rabbit's foot blocked the blade from actually stabbing through. Morgan smiled and thanked Theo for the lucky rabbit's foot once more. Vivian suddenly woke up from her slumber to her loud, annoying alarm. She sat up and rapidly jumped out of bed, not only realizing her alarm had been ringing for 10 minutes, but it was Friday the 13th. She skipped the shower, quickly got dressed, and ran out the door. If she ran fast enough, she'd be able to catch her usual bus. The day was bright and the sun was peeking out through some thick clouds. The streets were wet and puddles were all over the place from the rain throughout the night. Vivian jumped into her usual spot where she waited for her bus, right on the curb with her toes peeking slightly over the edge. She smiled as she had somehow managed to make the morning just as the others, despite it being a day dedicated to bad luck superstitions. She leaned out toward the street to see if she saw the bus coming, but then she was blinded by a semi-truck that zoomed by that also managed to run into the puddle and got Vivian's pants and shoes wet. She then felt a sudden feeling of frustration and annoyance. But she remembered that this was the same bus she would be waiting for anyway if she had gotten up in time. She saw a bus coming, right on schedule, and when she stepped back to make room for it to pull over right in front of her, like usual, the bus kept going. She grunted and waved at it as it drove past her. The bus didn't stop. She managed to read the sign that read "out of service" on the back. She frustratingly looked back and saw another bus coming. This bus pulled over and opened the doors for her to hop on. She greeted the bus driver, as she always did, although it was someone she had never seen before. She walked towards the middle of the bus, where she always sat. Again, she felt like her day was fixing itself and things were going back to normal. She opened up her purse and pulled out the book she was reading that month. A few minutes later, the bus stopped to pick up a man that was stumbling down the middle aisle, and he quickly sat next to Vivian before the bus started moving faster. Vivian greeted the good-looking man and he smiled at her. She kept reading and suddenly the bus swerved left, making Vivian hit her head on the glass window, and making the man next to her spill his coffee on both of them. Vivian could not believe what bad luck she was having that morning and frankly felt like going back home and crawling into bed, despite all her efforts. The man offered her his jacket to clean herself up, but she jokingly said it was all right because now the coffee stain matched the puddle stained from her pants. He wouldn't stop apologizing, and she told him it was all right. Her stop was coming up, and she began standing up when the man next to her also said it was his stop. They both got off the bus and walked in the same direction. Vivian asked the man if this was his usual stop. He said he hoped it was. He was heading to a job interview. He ended up walking into the same building where Vivian worked as well, a bank. They said goodbye and Vivian walked to her office. As soon as she sat down, a coworker ran into her office. "There's a man out front asking for us to fill a duffel bag with money." Vivian stood up and walked out towards the customer service area, and saw the teller who was helping the robber, the man from the bus. He saw Vivian, and his eyes welled up. He hit the counter, and with a closed fist hit the glass that stood between him and the teller. He looked straight at Vivian and said, "You don't know how lucky you are," and with that, he pulled his empty duffel bag back towards himself, and left. Vivian asked the teller if she was all right, then walked back to her office. Vivian wiggled her wet toes in her shoes that had been wet by the semi-truck running into a puddle earlier, and then she stared down at the coffee stain from the almost bank robber she sat next to, and she couldn't help but smile. She was lucky, and as she looked out and at her calendar at the big letters stating Friday the 13th, she couldn't help but remember something her dad would always say, "You never know what worse luck, your bad luck, has saved you from."